Every species in the galaxy had a rule, an unspoken, unwritten rule that every civilization followed from the moment they first touched the stars. You could fight wars. You could conquer planets. You could burn cities and shatter fleets. But you never, ever touched prisoners of war, because prisoners were the last thread of honor between enemies. They were proof that even in the darkest moments of conflict, life still meant something. Every species understood this. Every species respected this. Every species except one. The Vraxian Dominion broke that rule, and what happened next became the most terrifying chapter in galactic history. Not because of the war that followed, but because of what humanity became when they had nothing left to lose. The signal came through at exactly 1400 hours, Earth Standard Time. It was a Tuesday. Captain Alara Voss remembered that detail because she had just finished her second cup of coffee and was reviewing patrol reports from the Outer Rim. Her desk was cluttered with datapads, empty food wrappers, and a small photograph of her younger brother Daniel in his dress uniform. He had been deployed to the Kerath system 6 months ago with the 4th Expeditionary Battalion. She had not heard from him in 3 weeks, but that was normal during active deployments. Communication blackouts were standard procedure when operating near contested space. The signal was not a message. It was a broadcast. It came on every frequency, every channel, every military and civilian band across the entire sector. Someone wanted everyone to hear it. Someone wanted everyone to see it. Alara opened the file. The screen flickered, and then the image appeared. It was a wide room, dark and cold, with metal walls covered in strange symbols she did not recognize. The floor was wet. The lighting was harsh and blue, casting deep shadows in every corner. In the center of the room, lined up on their knees, were 37 human soldiers. Their uniforms were torn. Their faces were bruised and bloodied. Some of them had their arms bound behind their backs with thick metal restraints. Others had been beaten so badly they could barely hold their heads up. Alara's blood went cold. She recognized the unit patches on their shoulders. 4th Expeditionary Battalion. She recognized the face in the front row. Second from the left, kneeling with his jaw set tight and his eyes staring straight ahead with the kind of defiance only a 24-year-old who still believed in something could manage. Daniel. Behind the prisoners stood a line of Vraxian soldiers. They were tall, nearly 7 feet, with grey skin stretched tight over angular bones. Their eyes were black and reflective like polished stone. They wore ceremonial armor, dark and decorated with the teeth and claws of species they had conquered. The Vraxians were old. Their empire had existed for over 12,000 years. They had fought wars against dozens of civilizations and won nearly all of them. They viewed themselves as the natural rulers of the galaxy. Every other species was either a servant, a subject, or a problem to be eliminated. Humanity had been classified as a problem. The war had started 18 months ago over a disputed system called Kerathan. Both species had claimed the system for its rich mineral deposits. Diplomacy had failed. The Vraxians had demanded unconditional human withdrawal. The United Earth Coalition had refused. Shots were fired. Ships were destroyed. And within weeks, a full-scale conflict had erupted across 3 star systems. The fighting had been brutal but contained. Both sides had suffered losses, but neither had crossed the fundamental boundaries of warfare. Prisoners had been taken by both sides and treated according to the interstellar accords that every spacefaring civilization recognized. Humanity had even returned wounded Vraxian soldiers to their own people as a gesture of good faith. It was how wars were supposed to work. Bloody, painful, but with limits. Broadcast changed everything. A Vraxian commander stepped forward. He was larger than the others, his armor more decorated, his posture radiating absolute authority. He spoke in Vraxian first, then switched to broken but understandable Earth Common. His voice was flat and mechanical, like someone reading instructions they did not care about. Humans of the United Earth Coalition, you have been given many chances to withdraw from Vraxian territory. You have refused. You have resisted. You have shown that you do not understand your place in this galaxy. You are young. You are weak. You are nothing compared to the Vraxian Dominion, and yet you fight. You send your soldiers to die in systems that were never yours. You waste your lives for planets you cannot hold. This is foolishness. This is arrogance. And arrogance must be punished. He gestured to the prisoners. These soldiers were captured during the Battle of Kerath. 7. They fought. They lost. They were given the chance to surrender their weapons and their dignity and accept Vraxian authority. They refused. They continued to resist even after capture. They attempted to escape. They attacked their guards. They showed no respect for Vraxian law, Vraxian tradition, or Vraxian power. He paused. The room was silent except for the low hum of alien machinery somewhere behind the walls. The Vraxian Dominion does not tolerate defiance. We do not negotiate with species that cannot recognize their own inferiority. These prisoners are not soldiers. They are animals. And animals that bite are put down. What happened next was broadcast to every human colony, every military base, every civilian communication hub, and every allied species in the known galaxy. The Vraxian soldiers stepped forward. They drew long, curved blades from their belts, the kind of weapons designed not for efficiency, but for spectacle, for pain. The first prisoner was a woman, Sergeant Mira Chen, 31 years old, born on Mars Colony 3. She had a daughter back home who had just turned 6. Mira did not scream. She looked the Vraxian commander directly in his black reflective eyes, and she said 3 words in a voice that never wavered. You will regret this. They killed her slowly. They killed all of them. Slowly. One by one. 37 human soldiers. 37 sons and daughters. 37 people who had families waiting for them to come home. The broadcast lasted 47 minutes. Every second was recorded. Every face was visible. Every scream was heard by billions of humans across hundreds of worlds. Daniel Voss was the last one. He had watched every single death. He had watched his friends, his squad mates, the people he had trained with and fought beside for years, die one by one in front of him. When his turn came, he stood up. The restraints on his wrists had been weakened by the struggle of the man who had been killed before him, and Daniel had been quietly working them loose the entire time. He pulled his hands free. The Vraxians reached for him, but he was faster. He grabbed the blade from the nearest soldier's hand, and he drove it into the commander's throat. The commander staggered back, black blood pouring from the wound. Daniel turned to face the camera. His face was covered in bruises. His left eye was swollen shut. His uniform was torn and stained with the blood of his fallen friends, but he was standing, and he looked directly into the lens with an expression that would be burned into the memory of every human who saw it. Tell Earth, he said. Tell them what happened here. Tell them we did not break. 7 Vraxian soldiers tackled him. The broadcast cut to static 3 seconds later, but everyone knew how it ended. Ilara Voss sat in her chair for a long time after the screen went dark. She did not move. She did not speak. She did not cry. The coffee on her desk had gone cold. The patrol reports no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except the image of her brother standing with a blade in his hand and fire in his eyes. Around her, the command center had gone completely silent. Every officer, every technician, every analyst had watched the same broadcast. Some were crying. Some were shaking with rage. Some had already started pulling up tactical maps and fleet deployments without being ordered to. Ilara picked up her comm unit. Her hand was steady. Her voice was calm. She connected to Fleet Admiral Marcus Kane, the Supreme Commander of all United Earth Coalition military forces. Admiral, she said, I assume you saw the broadcast. There was a pause. When Kane spoke, his voice was different from anything she had ever heard from him. Marcus Kane was known for his calm, measured approach to command. He was a strategist, a thinker, a man who weighed every option before making a decision. But the voice on the other end of the comm was not that man. It was something older, something colder, something that had been buried deep inside the human species for thousands of years and had just been woken up. Every human alive saw it, Captain. Every single one. What are our orders, sir? Another pause, longer this time. Captain Voss, I want you to recall every ship in the sector, every destroyer, every cruiser, every fighter, every gunboat, every armed transport, and every vessel capable of carrying a weapon. I want the entire Third Fleet mobilized within 48 hours. I want the reserve forces activated across all colonies. I want every weapons factory running triple shifts. I want the research divisions to unlock every project that has ever been classified as too dangerous for deployment. Every single one. Ilara felt something shift inside her chest. It was not grief. Not yet. Grief would come later, in the quiet hours when there was no one to see. What she felt now was something else entirely. It was the same thing every human felt at that moment, across every world, on every ship, in every home where the broadcast had been watched. It was the collective, unified, absolute decision that the Vraxian Dominion had just made the worst mistake any civilization in the history of the galaxy had ever made. Understood, Admiral. Rules of engagement? The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing Alara had ever heard. Because when Marcus Kane finally spoke, he did not give the standard military response. He did not reference protocols or treaties or acceptable limits of force. He said something that had never been said by a United Earth Coalition commander in the entire history of human space exploration. There are no rules anymore. The transmission ended. Alara stood up. She looked at the photograph of Daniel on her desk. She picked it up, studied his face for a long moment, and then placed it carefully in her breast pocket, right over her heart. Then she turned to her crew. You heard the Admiral. All hands to battle stations. Recall the fleet. We are going to Vraxian space. No one asked questions. No one hesitated. No one suggested they wait for diplomatic channels or political approval or careful consideration of the consequences. Every single person in that room moved with a speed and purpose that had nothing to do with military training and everything to do with something far more primal. Across the galaxy, the same scene was playing out on every human vessel, every military installation, every colony world. The broadcast had been designed to break the human spirit, to show them the cost of resistance, to make them afraid. The Vraxians had spent 12,000 years perfecting the art of intimidation. They knew how to break civilizations. They had done it dozens of times before. Fear was their greatest weapon. But they had made a critical miscalculation, a fundamental error in judgment that no amount of intelligence data or cultural analysis could have prepared them for. Because they had studied human behavior, human psychology, human social structures, and human military capabilities, they had built profiles and models and predictions, and every single one of those models told them the same thing, that humans, when faced with overwhelming loss and brutal violence, would retreat, would negotiate, would submit the way every other species had submitted when faced with Vraxian power. Every model was wrong, because the Vaxians had studied what humans did in peacetime, what they did when they were comfortable, when they were safe, when they had something to lose. They had not studied what humans did when they had nothing left to lose. They had not studied what happened when you took away the one thing that kept human darkness in check. Hope. The moment that broadcast ended, hope died in the hearts of billions of humans, and what replaced it was something the galaxy had never seen before. Something ancient and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. It was not rage, though rage was part of it. It was not vengeance, though vengeance was coming. It was something deeper, something woven into the very DNA of the species. A survival instinct that had been refined over millions of years of evolution on one of the most hostile planets in the known galaxy, a world where everything wanted to kill you, where the weather could destroy cities, where the ground itself could open up and swallow civilizations whole. Humans had not evolved to run from danger. They had evolved to run toward it, to hunt it, to destroy it so completely that it could never threaten them again. The Vraxians had poked the most dangerous animal in the galaxy, and now that animal was awake. Within 24 hours of the broadcast, every human military force in existence had been mobilized. Ships that had been in dry dock for maintenance were launched with repair crews still on board. Retired soldiers flooded recruitment centers in numbers that overwhelmed the system. Civilian transport ships were converted into troop carriers overnight. Weapons that had been locked away in classified vaults, deemed too destructive for conventional warfare, were pulled from storage and loaded onto warships. The United Earth Coalition Parliament met in emergency session. The debate lasted exactly 11 minutes. There was no opposition. There was no dissent. The vote to authorize unrestricted military operations against the Vraxian Dominion was unanimous. Every single representative from every single human colony pressed the same button. War. Total. Unrestricted. Absolute. And somewhere in the cold depths of Vraxian space, the Dominion celebrated what they believed was a decisive psychological victory. They had shown the humans the cost of defiance. They had demonstrated Vraxian power in the most brutal and public way possible. Their analysts predicted that within days the humans would send diplomatic envoys. They would negotiate, they would submit. It was simply a matter of time. They had no idea what was coming. The Vraxian border outpost at Thalax 9 was the first to notice something wrong. Commander Zorik Vel had been stationed there for 3 standard years, monitoring the quiet stretch of space between Vraxian territory and the neutral buffer zone that separated them from human-controlled systems. It was a boring assignment. Nothing ever happened at Thalax 9. The most exciting event in the past year had been a minor malfunction in the atmospheric recycler that made the entire station smell like burnt metal for 2 days. Zorik was reviewing supply manifests when his sensor officer, a young female named Kira Vel, called out from her station. Her voice had a quality to it that Zorik had never heard before. Not panic exactly, but something close. Something that suggested the universe had suddenly stopped making sense. Commander, I am reading multiple contacts on the long-range sensors. Zorik did not look up from his datapad. Patrol ships. Probably another routine sweep from the 12th Defense Fleet. No, Commander. These contacts are not coming from our space. They are coming from the human side of the buffer zone. Now Zorik looked up. How many contacts? Kira was quiet for a moment. Her fingers moved across her console, adjusting filters, recalibrating sensors, running the numbers again because the first time had to be wrong. The second time had to be wrong too. She ran them a third time. Commander, I am reading 4,712 individual vessel signatures, and the number is still climbing. Zorik stood up slowly. He walked to the sensor station and looked at the display himself. The screen was filled with dots, hundreds of them, thousands. Each one representing a ship. They were moving in a formation so tight and so precise that the sensor array was having trouble distinguishing individual vessels. They were coming fast, not at patrol speed or approach speed, or even combat speed. They were coming at maximum burn, the kind of velocity you only used when you did not care about fuel efficiency or engine wear or arriving in any condition to negotiate. The kind of velocity you used when you wanted to hit something as hard as possible. Send a priority alert to Vraxian High Command, Zorik said. His voice was steady, but his hands had begun to tremble. Tell them the humans are coming. All of them. The message was sent. By the time it reached High Command, Thalax 9 had already been destroyed. The station was not attacked with weapons. A human destroyer, moving at full combat speed, had simply flown through it. The shields of the destroyer absorbed the impact. The station did not have that luxury. It was scattered across 1,000 kilometers of space in pieces no larger than a fist. The humans had not even slowed down. Fleet Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the UEC Retribution, the flagship of the combined human armada. The Retribution was the largest warship humanity had ever built. It was nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapon systems that ranged from conventional railguns and missile batteries to experimental energy weapons that had been classified as planet killers and locked away in vaults for the past decade. Those vaults were now empty. Every weapon the ship could carry had been loaded, armed, and pointed forward. Around the Retribution, the rest of the fleet stretched across space in every direction. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships, carriers loaded with fighters, converted civilian transports packed with ground troops, and dozens of support ships carrying supplies, ammunition, and medical equipment. It was the largest military fleet ever assembled by any species in recorded galactic history. Every human colony had sent ships. Every military branch had deployed its full strength. Even the research stations had contributed, sending experimental vessels loaded with prototype weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Kane looked at the tactical display. The first Vraxian defense line was directly ahead. According to intelligence reports, it consisted of approximately 2,000 warships supported by orbital defense platforms and ground-based artillery installations on 3 fortified worlds. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a formidable defense. The Vraxians had built it to be impenetrable. Kane did not care about normal circumstances. All fleet elements, this is Admiral Kane. Formation Alpha. Weapons free. Do not stop for anything. Do not accept surrenders. Do not respond to communications. We go through them. The fleet surged forward. The Vraxian defense line saw them coming and opened fire. Thousands of energy beams and projectiles streaked across the void, slamming into human shields and hulls. Ships were hit. Some were damaged. A few were destroyed. The fleet did not slow down. It did not spread out or take evasive action or do any of the things that military doctrines said you were supposed to do when facing a prepared defensive position. Instead, every human ship accelerated. The Vraxians had expected the humans to approach cautiously, to probe their defenses, test for weaknesses, and develop a plan of attack. That was how every species fought. That was how wars worked. You did not simply charge into a fortified position with your entire fleet. It was suicide. But the humans were not trying to be smart. They were not trying to be tactical. They were not trying to win with minimum casualties or preserve their ships for future engagements. They had looked at the cost of what they were about to do and decided, collectively and without hesitation, that they were willing to pay it. The two fleets collided. There was no other word for it. The human armada hit the Vraxian defense line like a fist hitting glass. Ships slammed into each other. Weapons fired at point-blank range. Explosions lit up the void in colors that had no name. Human destroyers drove themselves directly into Vraxian capital ships, firing every weapon they had, even as their hulls crumpled from the impact. Fighters weaved between the wreckage, targeting engine systems and bridge sections with a precision that bordered on artistic. The Vraxians fought back. They were experienced warriors with 12,000 years of military tradition. Their ships were well built, their crews well trained, their commanders seasoned veterans of a dozen campaigns. They were not afraid of a fight, but they had never fought anything like this. The humans were not fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like something else entirely. There was no hesitation in their movements, no caution, no self-preservation instinct. Ships that should have retreated when their shields failed instead accelerated into the enemy formation, using their own destruction as a weapon. Pilots who had lost their weapons systems rammed their fighters into Vraxian bridge sections. Ground troops who were transported onto captured vessels fought with a ferocity that left Vraxian soldiers literally backing away in something that none of them had ever felt before. Fear. The first defense line fell in 6 hours. It had been designed to hold for months. Kane did not celebrate. He did not pause to consolidate his gains or set up supply lines, or any of the things a careful commander would do after a major victory. He simply looked at the tactical display, identified the next Vraxian position, and gave the same order. Forward. Do not stop. The fleet moved deeper into Vraxian space. Every system they entered, they found the same thing. Vraxian defenders who had been prepared for a conventional war and instead found themselves facing something they could not understand. Something that did not follow the rules. Something that did not care about losses or strategy or the long-term consequences of their actions. On the bridge of the Retribution, Kane received a report from Captain Ilara Voss. She had been given command of a fast attack squadron tasked with striking ahead of the main fleet, hitting Vraxian supply lines and communication relays before the main force arrived. Her squadron had already destroyed 14 Vraxian supply convoys and 7 communication stations. The Vraxian rear area was going dark. Their commanders were losing the ability to coordinate their forces. And without coordination, even the most powerful military in the galaxy was just a collection of individual units fighting alone. Admiral, Ilara reported, we intercepted a Vraxian communication from their high command to all sector commanders. They are ordering a general retreat to the inner defense perimeter around their homeworld. How fast are they pulling back? They are abandoning fortified positions without a fight, destroying their own supply depots to keep us from capturing them. They are scared. Kane allowed himself a small, grim smile. Good. Keep hitting their supply lines. I want them hungry, blind, and alone when we arrive. Voss out. The retreat of the Vraxian forces was not orderly. It was chaos. Thousands of ships abandoned their positions across dozens of star systems, racing toward the perceived safety of their homeworld. Along the way, they left behind entire colonies, military installations, and billions of Vraxian civilians who suddenly found themselves undefended in the path of an advancing human armada. Kane made a decision at this point that surprised many of his officers. He ordered the fleet to bypass civilian populations entirely. Human ships flew past Vraxian colony worlds without firing a shot. Ground forces that encountered civilians let them pass. Medical ships even treated wounded Vraxian non-combatants who had been caught in the crossfire of retreating military units. When questioned about this by his executive officer, Commander James Park, Kane's answer was simple. We are not here for their civilians. We are here for the ones who killed our people. Every soldier, every officer, every commander who was involved in that broadcast. Every leader who ordered it. Every government official who approved it. Those are our targets. Everyone else is irrelevant. And if their military surrenders? Kane turned to look at Park. The expression on his face made the commander take an involuntary step backward. They will not surrender, because we are not going to give them the chance. The human advance continued at a pace that stunned galactic observers. Species that had been watching the conflict from a distance, expecting a long and drawn-out war between two major powers, instead watched in disbelief as the entire Vraxian outer defense network collapsed in less than 3 weeks. Systems that the Vraxians had held for thousands of years fell one after another. Military installations that had been considered impregnable were reduced to debris. Fleet formations that had never lost a battle were shattered and scattered. The Galactic Council, a loose organization of spacefaring civilizations that served as a forum for interstellar diplomacy, called an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss what they were witnessing. Many of them had fought the Varaxians at some point in their history. Many of them had lost. Some of them had been conquered entirely and had spent centuries under Vraxian rule before winning their independence. They knew how powerful the Vraxian military was. They knew what 12,000 years of military tradition meant. And they watched in stunned silence as a species that had been in space for less than 300 years tore that tradition apart like it was made of paper. The Corvathi ambassador, a being from a species that had fought a 20-year war against the Vraxians and barely survived, spoke during the council session. His words were translated into every language spoken by every species present. We always knew the humans were dangerous. From the moment they made first contact, every intelligence analysis, every cultural study, every military assessment told us the same thing. They come from a death world, a planet so hostile that it should have killed them 1,000 times over. Instead, it made them into something that should not exist, a predator species that developed empathy. A warrior race that built hospitals, a civilization that could split the atom and use it to power cities instead of just weapons. They are a contradiction, a paradox. And every species in this galaxy made the same assumption about them. We assumed that because they were kind, they were soft. Because they valued life, they would not take it easily. Because they sought peace, they were afraid of war. He paused and looked around the chamber. We were all wrong. The humans are not kind because they are weak. They are kind because they are strong enough to afford it. They choose peace not because they cannot wage war, but because they know exactly what they are capable of when they stop choosing peace. The Vaxians just showed us what happens when you take that choice away from them. Back in Vaxian space, the human advance had reached the inner defense perimeter. This was the last line of protection before the Vraxian homeworld itself. It was the most heavily fortified military position in the known galaxy. Thousands of warships, hundreds of orbital defense platforms, planetary shield generators, ground-based weapons capable of shooting ships out of orbit, and a garrison of over 50 million Vraxian soldiers. It had been built over the course of 8,000 years. It had never been breached. It had never even been seriously threatened. Kane looked at it on his tactical display. He studied the defenses, the formations, the fields of fire, and the interlocking support networks. He studied them carefully and thoroughly. Then he turned to his weapons officer. Target their shield generators. All of them. Simultaneously. Sir, there are over 300 shield generators spread across 12 worlds. To hit them all at once, we would need to deploy the Helios weapons. The Helios weapons. Orbital bombardment systems that used focused energy beams powerful enough to crack a planet's crust. They had been developed 15 years ago and immediately classified as weapons of mass destruction, too dangerous for any scenario. Their existence had been one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets. Kane did not hesitate. Deployed the Helios weapons. The weapons officer looked at Kane for a long moment. Then he nodded and began entering the launch codes. Across the fleet, massive weapons platforms that had been hidden inside the hulls of transport ships began to unfold. They were enormous structures, each one the size of a small moon, bristling with focusing arrays and power cores that glowed with a light that was not quite natural. They had been designed to end wars, not to win them through strategy or attrition, but to end them completely and permanently. The Vraxian defenders saw the platforms deploying and recognized what they were. Panic spread through their communication channels. Ships broke formation, trying to reach the platforms before they could fire. Ground commanders screamed for orbital support. Planetary governors began emergency evacuation procedures. It was all too late. The Helios weapons fired simultaneously. 300 beams of concentrated energy struck 300 targets across 12 worlds at the same moment. Shield generators that had protected the Vraxian homeworld for millennia exploded in cascades of light and force. The carefully constructed defense network, the pride of the Vraxian military, the wall that had kept every enemy at bay for 8,000 years, came apart in a single coordinated strike that lasted exactly 4.7 seconds. The inner defense perimeter was gone. The path to the Vraxian homeworld was open. Kane opened a channel to the entire fleet. All units. The road is clear. Advance to the Vraxian homeworld. This ends today. 4,000 human warships surged forward through the gap, leaving behind a trail of burning debris and shattered defenses that stretched across light years of space. They moved with a singular purpose, a unified will that was not commanded from the top down but rose from the bottom up. Every human on every ship felt the same thing. Every pilot, every gunner, every engineer, every medic, every cook and every galley on every vessel in the fleet shared the same thought, the same drive, the same absolute determination. They remembered the faces of 37 soldiers who had been killed on their knees. They remembered Sergeant Mira Chen, who had told the Vraxians they would regret it. They remembered Daniel Voss, who had stood up when every reason in the universe told him to stay down. And they were coming to make sure the galaxy never forgot. The Vraxian homeworld grew larger on every screen, on every viewport, on every tactical display in the fleet. It was a massive planet, larger than Earth, with swirling grey clouds and dark oceans. Cities covered its surface, glittering with the lights of a civilization that had existed for 12,000 years. Orbital stations and shipyards circled it like a crown of metal and glass. It was beautiful. It was ancient. It was the heart of an empire that had ruled over hundreds of worlds and billions of lives, and it was completely undefended. Kane looked at it for a long time. The bridge was silent. Everyone was waiting for the order that would determine what kind of species humanity truly was, waiting to see if the rage that had carried them across the galaxy would consume them entirely, or if something else still survived beneath the fury. Kane took a breath, then he opened a channel. Not to his fleet, to the Vraxian homeworld. Kane's voice echoed across every frequency on the Vraxian homeworld. Every speaker, every screen, every communication device on the planet carried his words. Billions of Vaxians heard the voice of the man who had brought the largest armada in galactic history to their doorstep. Many of them expected threats. Some expected demands for unconditional surrender. A few expected silence, followed by the roar of weapons tearing their world apart. None of them expected what Kane actually said. People of the Vraxian Dominion, my name is Fleet Admiral Marcus Kane of the United Earth Coalition. 3 weeks ago, your military leadership executed 37 of my soldiers, prisoners of war, unarmed men and women who had surrendered under the protection of interstellar law. They were tortured and killed on camera, and that recording was sent to every corner of the galaxy as a demonstration of Vraxian power. He paused. The bridge of the retribution was silent. Every officer stood at their station, listening. I am now in orbit above your homeworld, with enough firepower to turn this planet into dust. Your defense network is being destroyed. Your fleet has been scattered. Your military is broken. There is nothing standing between my weapons and your cities. Nothing between my soldiers and your families. I want you to understand that clearly. I want you to feel what my people felt when they watched that broadcast. I want you to know what it is like to be completely helpless. Across the planet, Vraxian civilians looked up at the sky. Through the clouds, they could see the lights of human ships. Thousands of them, filling the orbital space above their world like stars that had fallen and refused to touch the ground. Parents held their children. Elders who had lived through a dozen wars found themselves trembling for the first time in their lives. Kane continued, But I did not come here to destroy your world. I did not bring my fleet across the galaxy to kill your civilians, or burn your cities, or erase your civilization from existence. Because that is what the Vraxians would do. That is what your empire has done to dozens of species over 12,000 years. You conquered. You enslaved. You destroyed anyone who stood in your way. And you called it strength. It is not strength. It is cowardice. Killing prisoners is cowardice. Targeting civilians is cowardice. Using fear as a weapon against the defenseless is the act of a species that is too weak to earn respect and too afraid to face an enemy that can fight back. He took a breath. Humanity is not like you. We could destroy this planet right now. We could end 12,000 years of Vraxian civilization in a single afternoon. And part of me wants to. Part of every human in this fleet wants to. Because we are angry. We are grieving. And 37 of our people are dead because your leaders decided that cruelty was more valuable than honor. Another pause. Longer this time. But we will not do it. Because the moment we do, we become you. And we would rather die than become you. On the bridge, Alara Voss stood near the tactical station, listening. Her hand rested over the pocket where she kept Daniel's photograph. Her eyes were dry. She had not cried since the broadcast. She was not sure she could anymore. Something had hardened inside her during the past 3 weeks. Something that would never fully soften again. But as she listened to Kane's words, she felt something crack, just slightly, in the walls she had built around herself. Not grief. Something else. Something that felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. Kane's voice filled the bridge again. Here are my terms. They are not negotiable. First, every member of your military leadership who ordered, approved, or participated in the execution of human prisoners will surrender themselves to United Earth Coalition custody within 12 hours. Every single one. From the commander who gave the order to the soldiers who carried it out, they will face trial before an interstellar tribunal. If they are found guilty, they will be sentenced according to the laws of the species whose people they murdered. Second, the Vraxian Dominion will immediately release every prisoner of war from every species currently held in Vraxian detention. Not just humans, every species, every prisoner, within 24 hours. Third, the Vraxian military will be reduced to a defensive force only. No offensive fleet, no expeditionary forces, no occupation armies on conquered worlds. Every species currently under Vraxian rule will be given the choice of independence or continued voluntary association. And I emphasize the word voluntary. Fourth, the Vraxian Dominion will pay reparations to the families of the 37 soldiers who were murdered, not in resources or territory, in acknowledgement. A formal public admission of guilt broadcast on every channel in the galaxy, in every language, to every species. Your leaders will stand before the galaxy and say what they did, and they will apologize. These are my terms. You have 12 hours to comply. If you do not, I will not destroy your planet, but I will dismantle your empire piece by piece, system by system, world by world, until there is nothing left of the Vraxian Dominion, except a single planet with no fleet, no army, and no power. And then I will leave you alone with your history. And the galaxy will remember what you were and what you became because you thought killing prisoners made you strong. The transmission ended. On the Vraxian homeworld, chaos erupted. The civilian population, which had been kept largely in the dark about the true progress of the war by state-controlled media, was suddenly confronted with two devastating realities at once. First, that their military had committed an atrocity that violated every principle of interstellar law. Second, that the retaliation for that atrocity had brought their entire empire to the edge of extinction in less than a month. The Vraxian Supreme Council, the ruling body of the Dominion, went into emergency session. The council chamber was deep beneath the capital city, protected by layers of armor and shielding that could theoretically withstand orbital bombardment. But everyone in the room knew that theoretical protection meant nothing against the fleet currently orbiting above them. Supreme Commander Thorak Vel, the highest-ranking military officer in the Dominion, stood before the council. He was old, even by Vraxian standards. His grey skin had darkened with age, and his black eyes had lost some of their reflective sharpness. He had served the Dominion for over 200 years. He had commanded fleets, conquered worlds, and built the military machine that had made the Vraxians the most feared species in the galaxy. And he had been the one who had approved the execution of the human prisoners, not directly. He had not given the specific order. That had come from Regional Commander Korath Vel, the officer who had appeared in the broadcast. But Thorak had approved the general policy of using captured humans as propaganda tools. He had signed the directive that classified human prisoners as combatants without rights. He had created the conditions that made the executions not only possible, but inevitable. He stood before the council now and said nothing for a long time. "They are bluffing," said Councillor Drever, one of the younger members. "They will not dismantle our empire. The cost would be too high. They have already lost ships. Their supply lines are stretched thin. If we resist, they will have to negotiate." Thorak looked at Drever with an expression that was not contempt. Exactly, but something close. "Councillor, I've been studying the humans since this war began. I have read every intelligence report, every cultural analysis, every psychological profile our experts have produced. And I have spent the last 3 weeks watching everything I thought I knew about this species be proven completely wrong." He turned to face the full council. "They are not bluffing. They will do exactly what they said, every word. Because they have already done things that no rational military force should have been willing to do. They charged our defense lines without hesitation. They sacrificed ships by the hundreds without slowing down. They advanced through our territory faster than any force in recorded history. Not because they had superior technology or numbers, but because they simply did not stop. They did not rest. They did not resupply. They burned through their fuel reserves, their ammunition stores, and their own bodies to get here as fast as possible." He paused. "Do you know what our analysts call that kind of behavior? Suicidal. Irrational. Impossible to predict. And yet here they are, in orbit above our world, with the power to destroy everything we have built. They did not come here to negotiate, Councillor. They came here to end this, one way or another." The council argued for 6 hours. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to flee. Some wanted to use the civilian population as shields, betting that the humans would not risk killing innocents. That suggestion was made by a military advisor who had clearly not been listening to anything that had happened in the past 3 weeks. In the end, it was not the council that made the decision. It was the Vraxian people. Word of Kane's broadcast had spread across the planet within minutes. The civilian population, which had endured rationing, blackouts, and the constant fear of orbital bombardment for weeks, had heard the human admiral's words. And unlike their leaders, they understood something fundamental about the situation they were in. The humans were offering them a way out, a chance to survive. All they had to do was hand over the people responsible. The protests started small. A few thousand Vraxians gathering outside government buildings in the capital. Then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Within hours, millions of Vraxian civilians were in the streets, demanding that the Supreme Council comply with the human terms. Not out of love for humanity, not out of guilt for what had been done, out of pure survival instinct. The same instinct that had driven the Vraxians to build their empire in the first place. The military garrison in the capital was ordered to disperse the crowds. The soldiers refused. Not because they sympathized with the humans, but because many of them had friends and family in those crowds. And because they had seen what happened to the soldiers who had tried to stop the human advance. They had watched the bravest warriors in Vraxian history run from human ships. They had no desire to find out what happened when those ships turned their attention to a planet's surface. At the 9-hour mark, 3 hours before Kane's deadline, the Supreme Council issued its response. Supreme Commander Tharak Vel personally transmitted it to the human fleet. Admiral Kane, the Braxian Supreme Council accepts your terms. All military personnel involved in the execution of human prisoners will be surrendered to your custody. All prisoners of war held by the Dominion will be released immediately. The Vraxian military will comply with your requirements for restructuring, and I, Supreme Commander Thorak Vel, will personally deliver the public acknowledgement of guilt that you have demanded. When Tharak spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost reflective. Admiral, I have commanded the Vraxian military for 214 years. In that time, I have conquered 11 worlds and defeated 37 enemy fleets. I was taught from birth that the Vraxian Dominion was the pinnacle of civilization, that our power was proof of our superiority, that weaker species existed to serve us. I believed this. I believed it completely. Another pause. I do not believe it anymore. Not because you defeated us. Many species have challenged us before and lost, but because of how you defeated us. You had the power to destroy our world. You had every reason to do it.
We killed your people. We killed your people. We killed your people.
We broadcast their deaths to the galaxy as entertainment. Any species in the galaxy would have been justified in wiping us from existence. But you did not do it. You came here with the power of gods, and you chose mercy, not weakness, not hesitation, a deliberate, conscious choice to be better than what we did to you. In 214 years of command, I have never seen anything like that. I have never seen strength like that. You humans are terrifying, not because of your weapons, not because of your ships, because even when you have every reason to become monsters, you refuse. The transmission ended. Over the next 48 hours, the terms were carried out. Regional Commander Korith Vel and 43 other military officers were surrendered to UEC custody. They were transported to a neutral station where they would await trial before an interstellar tribunal comprised of representatives from 12 species. The trial would take months. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was inevitable. Across Vraxian-controlled space, prison facilities opened their doors. Human prisoners were the first to be released, but they were far from the last. Thousands of beings from dozens of species walked out of Vraxian detention centers, many of them having been held for years, some for decades. They emerged into the light of stars they had not seen in ages, blinking and disoriented and alive. Ilara Voss was part of the team that processed the released prisoners. She stood at the entrance of a Vraxian detention facility on a moon called Vecthar, checking names against the registry of captured human personnel. Her hands moved mechanically, scanning identification chips, verifying identities, directing people to medical teams. She had processed 47 former prisoners when a voice said her name. She looked up. Daniel Voss stood in front of her. He was thinner than she remembered. His face had new scars. His left eye, the one that had been swollen shut in the broadcast, was open but slightly unfocused, damaged by whatever had been done to him in the weeks since the recording. He was wearing a threadbare Vraxian prison uniform that was 2 sizes too large. He looked exhausted and broken and older than any 24-year-old should ever look. But he was alive. The broadcast had shown the deaths of 37 soldiers. What it had not shown was what happened after the camera cut to static. Daniel had stabbed the Vraxian commander, but the wound had not been fatal. The commander had survived, and in the chaos that followed, 3 other prisoners who had been held in adjacent cells but not included in the broadcast had managed to overpower their guards and reach Daniel before he was killed. The Vraxians, embarrassed by the failed execution and the commander's injury, had quietly moved Daniel and the surviving prisoners to a different facility. They had been beaten severely but kept alive, possibly as insurance, possibly out of spite. They had been imprisoned for 23 days, and now they were free. Ilara looked at her brother. He looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the processing station faded into background noise. The war, the fleet, the politics, the grand speeches and galactic consequences all became irrelevant. There was only a sister and a brother, standing 3 feet apart, alive. Daniel smiled. It was small and crooked, and it clearly hurt his damaged face, but it was real. "Hey, Ilara!" Ilara dropped her datapad. She crossed the 3 feet between them in one step and wrapped her arms around him so tightly that she could feel his ribs through the thin prison uniform. He hugged her back, and his grip was weaker than she remembered, but it was there, solid and warm and real. She did cry then, for the first time in 3 weeks, standing in the doorway of a Vaxian prison on a moon she had never heard of, 6 months ago, holding her brother who should have been dead. Captain Ilara Voss cried, and she did not care who saw. The aftermath of what became known as the Vraxian War reshaped the galaxy. The Vraxian Dominion, once the most powerful civilization in known space, was reduced to a single system with a defensive fleet and no ability to project force beyond its own borders. Dozens of species that had been under Vraxian control declared independence. New alliances formed. Old grudges were settled. The galactic political landscape shifted in ways that would take generations to fully understand. But the most significant change was not political. It was cultural. It was the change in how every species in the galaxy viewed humanity. Before the war, humans had been seen as newcomers, a young species. Energetic and creative certainly, but untested, unproven. Their kindness was often mistaken for naivety. Their diplomacy was seen as evidence that they lacked the backbone for real conflict. They were tolerated, sometimes admired, but rarely taken seriously as a major power. After the war, no one made that mistake again. The Corvathy ambassador, who had spoken so eloquently during the Galactic Council session, gave another speech after the war's conclusion. It was shorter than his first, but it was the one that was remembered, the one that was taught in schools and academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Every species in this galaxy has asked the same question about the humans. Are they warriors, or are they peacemakers? Are they dangerous, or are they kind? Are they to be feared, or are they to be trusted? After what we have witnessed, I believe the answer is clear. They are all of these things, simultaneously, without contradiction. They are kind because they choose to be, not because they must. They seek peace because they understand the true cost of war better than any of us ever will. And they are dangerous beyond anything we imagined, not because of their weapons or their technology, but because when they fight with the full weight of a species that has decided together that some things are worth any price. The Vraxians learned this lesson the hard way. Let the rest of us learn it through their example. Do not mistake human kindness for weakness. Do not mistake human patience for submission. And above all, do not ever give them a reason to stop being kind. Because the galaxy is not ready for what they become when they do. Fleet Admiral Marcus Kane retired from active service 6 months after the war's end. He returned to Earth, to a small house by a lake in a region that had once been called Minnesota. He lived quietly. He fished. He read books. He did not give interviews or write memoirs or attend ceremonies. When reporters asked him about the war, he always gave the same response. I did what had to be done. I hope no one ever has to do it again. Captain Elara Voss was promoted to Rear Admiral and given command of the new Outer Rim Defense Fleet. Her first order was to establish a permanent memorial at Kerath 7, at the exact location where the 4th Expeditionary Battalion had been captured. The memorial listed the names of all 37 soldiers who had died in the broadcast. At the base of the memorial, carved in stone that would last for millennia, were the last words of Sergeant Mira Chen. You will regret this. Daniel Voss spent 3 months in medical recovery. The damage to his eye was permanent, but the military offered him a prosthetic replacement that was actually better than the original. He turned it down. He said he wanted to keep the scar. When asked why, he said it helped him remember. He returned to active duty 8 months after his release. He was assigned to a diplomatic protection unit, guarding human ambassadors at interstellar conferences and negotiations. It was a quiet posting, peaceful even. He was good at it. He stood in rooms full of alien diplomats with his scarred face and his damaged eye and his quiet, steady presence. And he reminded everyone in those rooms, without saying a word, of what happened when diplomacy failed. Years later, a young Vraxian diplomat approached him during a reception at the Galactic Council. The Vraxian was nervous. He was part of the new generation, born after the war, raised in a society that was still coming to terms with what their empire had done and what it had cost. Sergeant Voss, the young Vraxian said, I wanted to tell you. What was done to you and your fellow soldiers was wrong. It was a crime, and my generation will spend our lives making sure nothing like it ever happens again. Daniel looked at the young Vraxian for a long time. He studied his face, his posture, his eyes. He looked for deception and found none. He looked for the arrogance that had defined the old Vraxian dominion and found only earnestness and shame and the desperate hope that forgiveness was possible. Daniel extended his hand. The Vraxian looked at it, confused. He had studied human customs but had never experienced this one in person. It is called a handshake, Daniel said. It means we start over. The Vraxian took his hand. His grip was uncertain but firm. And in that small gesture, in that single moment of contact between two people from two species that had tried to destroy each other, something began, not forgiveness. That would take generations. But the possibility of forgiveness. The opening of a door that had been slammed shut by violence and grief and rage. It was a small thing. But then again, the smallest things were always the most human. And the galaxy watched. And the galaxy remembered. And no species ever touched a human prisoner of war again. Not ever.